The science of staying warm. Have you ever held your hands near a campfire on a cold night? Move your hands closer and you feel the warmth. Move them away and the cold comes rushing back. Now imagine standing outside on a freezing winter night with almost no warm clothing, no heater, no blanket, no warm house to go home to, only a small box of matches. That is where our story begins. You may know the classic tale, The Little Match Girl. On a freezing winter evening, a young girl walks through the streets trying to sell matches. She is cold, hungry, and afraid to return home without having sold any. So she lights one match. For a moment, the tiny flame seems magical. She imagines herself sitting beside a warm stove. The match burns out. She lights another. Now she imagines a wonderful meal. Another match gives her another beautiful vision. And with each tiny flame, she experiences a moment of warmth and comfort in the middle of the freezing night. The story is beautiful, but also very sad, and it gives us a surprisingly scientific question. What is actually happening to her body when she is exposed to extreme cold? To understand that, we first need to understand something you carry with you everywhere. Your own personal heat source. Yes, it is you. Your body is constantly making heat. Even when you're sitting completely still, your body is producing heat. Your heart is beating, your brain is working, your lungs are moving. Your muscles are maintaining your posture. And inside your cells, chemical reactions are constantly releasing energy. Some of that energy becomes useful work. A lot of it eventually becomes heat. That is why your body normally feels warm. For a typical healthy person, the temperature deep inside the body is kept within a fairly narrow range. Your body is constantly balancing two things: how much heat you produce against how much heat you lose. If those two stay roughly balanced, your temperature stays stable. But on a freezing night, the balance can change. Your body may lose heat faster than it can replace it. And that is when things become dangerous. Where does your body's heat go? You might imagine that cold somehow gets into your body. But scientifically, it is better to think about it another way. Heat flows from warmer things toward colder things. Your body is warmer than the winter air, so heat naturally flows away from you. And there are several ways this can happen. Conduction. If you sit on a cold metal bench, heat can flow directly from your warm body into the colder metal. That's conduction. Convection. The air touching your skin becomes warmer. Then that warm air moves away and is replaced by colder air. That's convection. And wind makes this process especially effective. Radiation. Your body also constantly emits infrared radiation. You can't see most of it with your eyes, but thermal cameras can detect it. So even if the air around you were perfectly still, your body would still be losing heat by radiation. Evaporation. And if your skin or clothes are wet, evaporation can remove even more heat. That's one reason wet clothing can be so dangerous in cold conditions. So when you're outside on a freezing night, your body isn't simply feeling cold. It is participating in a constant battle over energy. Heat is leaving you. Your body has to keep producing enough heat to replace it. Your body fights back. Fortunately, your body has several clever defenses against cold. One of the first things you might notice is you shiver. Shivering is not just your body malfunctioning. It is an emergency heating system. Your muscles rapidly contract and relax. Those contractions require energy, and some of that energy is released as heat. Your body also changes blood flow. Blood vessels near the skin can constrict, reducing blood flow to the surface. Why? Because your skin is in direct contact with the cold environment. Reducing blood flow there can help slow heat loss from the body's core. Your body is basically saying, forget the fingers and toes for a moment. Protect the important stuff. But these defenses have limits. If heat loss continues for too long, your core temperature can begin to fall, and that's when hypothermia becomes a serious danger. What happens when the body gets too cold? Let's be careful here. Being a little chilly is not the same thing as severe hypothermia. When your body becomes dangerously cold, your nervous system and brain can stop working normally. At first, you may experience intense shivering. Your movements can become clumsy. You may have difficulty thinking clearly. You may become confused or extremely tired. As hypothermia becomes more severe, shivering can eventually decrease or stop. That's especially dangerous because shivering was one of the body's ways of generating heat, and the brain can become increasingly impaired. A severely hypothermic person may become disoriented, behave strangely, or have difficulty understanding what is happening around them. Sometimes people can even experience unusual perceptions or hallucination-like experiences. So when the little match girl sees beautiful scenes while surrounded by cold and darkness, we should be careful about interpreting that scientifically. The story is a work of fiction. Her visions are part of the tale. But extreme cold really can interfere with the brain's ability to think and perceive normally. And that gives us an important lesson. Temperature doesn't just affect your fingers and toes, it can affect your brain. So how do you actually stay warm? Now let's imagine you are designing clothing for someone spending a long time outdoors in cold weather. What should you do? Make one incredibly thick piece of clothing, or wear several layers? The answer might surprise you. Multiple layers can be extremely effective. Why? Because clothing itself isn't really creating much heat. Instead, good insulation slows down the movement of heat away from your body. And one of the best insulators available to you is air. Air is a poor conductor of heat, so if clothing traps lots of tiny pockets of still air, it can slow heat transfer. That is one reason fluffy materials can be good insulators. Think about a puffy winter jacket. It looks enormous compared with the amount of fabric actually touching your body. That's because much of its volume consists of trapped air. Now about those matches. Let's return to the story. The little match girl lights a match. She feels warmth. So here's the big question. Could she simply keep lighting matches to stay warm? Let's estimate. A typical small wooden match contains a surprisingly small amount of chemical energy. When the match burns, that chemical energy is released through combustion. Combustion is a chemical reaction involving a fuel and usually oxygen. In a match, the fuel burns rapidly and releases energy as heat and light. But here's the catch. The flame is tiny, and your body is much, much larger. Your body is also constantly losing heat to the surrounding environment. So the match has two problems. First, it doesn't contain very much energy. Second, most of its heat doesn't end up inside your body. Some heat warms the nearby air. Some escapes upward with hot gases. Some is lost through radiation. Only a fraction reaches your skin. How many matches would it take? Let's do a rough scientific estimate. Suppose one match releases around 10 kilojoules of chemical energy when it burns. That's a useful approximation for thinking about the scale, although actual matches vary. Now imagine a person who needs roughly 100 watts of metabolic heat production. A watt is 1 joule per second. So 100 watts equals 100 joules every second. Over 1 hour, that's 100 times 3, 600, which is about 360,000 joules. That's 360 kilojoules. If a match releases around 10 kilojoules, then in the most wildly optimistic calculation, 360 divided by 10 equals 36 matches per hour. But that's pretending that essentially all the heat from the matches somehow gets transferred into the person's body. It doesn't. If only a fraction of the flame's heat actually warms you, the required number could become much larger. And remember, the person isn't simply trying to generate heat. They're also continuously losing heat to the cold environment. The point of this calculation isn't to produce a perfect number. It's to reveal the enormous mismatch in scale. One tiny flame is tiny compared with the heat balance of an entire human body. And there is an even bigger problem. Imagine trying to keep warm by holding matches close to your hands. Your hands might feel warm. But what about the rest of your body? Your legs, your back, your chest, your head? The flame only heats a small region. Meanwhile, the rest of your body continues losing heat. This is why insulation is often more important than simply adding heat. Imagine pouring warm water into a bucket with a giant hole in the bottom. You could keep pouring, but if the water is escaping faster than you're adding it, the bucket will never fill. Your body can have a similar problem with heat. If you are losing heat extremely quickly, generating a little extra heat isn't enough. You need to slow the heat loss. That is what insulation does. Now return one last time to the little match girl and put everything together. The matches can create heat, but the much bigger problem is that her body is losing heat to a freezing environment. This is why winter clothing is so important. A good winter coat doesn't need to be hot when you put it on. It simply needs to make it harder for heat to escape. That's an important scientific idea. You don't always need to add more energy. Sometimes you need to slow down the energy leaving the system. That principle appears everywhere. A thermos slows heat transfer so your drink stays hot or cold. A refrigerator slows unwanted heat flow in one direction while using energy to move heat elsewhere. A house uses insulation to slow heat loss in winter. An astronaut's spacesuit has to manage heat transfer in an environment that is very different from Earth's atmosphere. Even animals have evolved insulation. Bird feathers, mammal fur, blubber in marine mammals. Different organisms have different ways of controlling heat loss. The little match girl lights a match because the flame gives her something she desperately needs, warmth. But the science tells us something deeper. The problem isn't simply, where can I find heat? The better question is, where is the heat going? That question takes us into thermodynamics. Heat flows. Energy moves. Materials slow that movement down, or allow it to happen quickly. Combustion releases chemical energy. Insulation reduces heat transfer. And your body constantly works to keep its internal temperature within a safe range. So the next time you see a tiny flame, don't just think, that's fire. Think about the invisible story happening around it. Chemical energy is being transformed. Heat is moving through the air. Radiation is spreading outward. Your skin is absorbing some energy. And at the same time, your body is sending its own heat into the environment. A tiny match can create a beautiful flame, but keeping a human being warm is a much bigger problem. Because staying warm isn't just about making heat. Stay warm and keep exploring.